Timer events enable you to control the flow of your process using a time condition. You can use timer events for creating a delay before running an activity. You can start a process based on a timer event. You can also configure a deadline for an activity or configure a deadline for a process. Oracle BPM enables you to configure timers using a specific date and time, a relative date and time, or a schedule. When you define a timer event as a boundary event, you can choose to configure it as an interrupting boundary event. When an interrupting timer event fires, the token leaves the main process flow to follow the flow the timer defines. The flow that an interrupting event defines can resume the main process flow. You can also choose to configure the boundary event as a non-interrupting boundary event. When a non-interrupting boundary event fires, the BPMN service engine creates a copy of the token that is running the main process flow and routes that copy through the flow the timer event defines. The flow a non-interrupting event defines cannot resume the main process flow. Let's look at how to implement timers in JDeveloper now. To start the process based on a timer, we need to change the trigger type of the start node to be based on a timer. The first thing that you have to do is to select the type of timer, that is, whether you want to start the timer on a specific date or a time cycle, that is, you want to trigger the process every few minutes or every few hours or something like that, or a time schedule. If you want to run the process every day at a certain time, choose daily and you can specify the time. If you want to run the process on specific days of the week at a certain time, choose weekly and you can add the days and the time. You can also add multiple days and times here. If you want to run the process on a certain day of the month, like the first day of the month or the fifth day of the month, then you can choose monthly and you can either choose all months, fifth day of every month, or you can actually specify the month. Again, you can add multiple days of the month here. If you want to trigger the process at intervals that are lesser than 24 hours, you can select a time cycle. Here you can define the cycle in terms of months, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. You can also use an expression. This expression equates to 3 months, 2 days, 5 hours, 30 minutes, 25 seconds. In fact, if you click OK on this and go back, you'd see that converted. Now, I've hard-coded this expression here, but you could build out this expression using the expression builder. You can build it based on your payload objects, or you could even use more powerful XPath expressions and use XPath functions to maybe even read it from a database. Let's say if I wanted to run this process every 3 minutes, I could change this. Put month and day as 0, hour as 0 as well, minutes as 3, seconds as 0. Now if you deploy this process and then check in Enterprise Manager, you'll see a process instance being kicked off every 3 minutes. You can also use a timer to implement a delay before an activity is run. In this case, my start node is a message start, and I've just used a catch timer and I've dropped it before the activity where I want to implement my delay. To wait 2 minutes, let's take a look at the implementation. So that's 2 minutes right there. You can also use a timer to implement an activity deadline. To do this, go to Catch Events and Catch Timer and drop it on the edge of the activity right here. Let's take a look at the timer properties. You'll see here that there is a checkbox for interrupting event. Let's take a look at what that means. So when the deadline on the activity expires, I want a process token to leave the main flow, that's the main flow right there, and follow the timer flow. To implement that, we need to use an interrupting boundary event. That's why, if we look at properties, I have the interrupting event as checked. Sometimes, after a certain time has passed, I may want to take some action, but I don't want the process token to leave the activity. In this case, you can configure the timer as a non-interrupting boundary event. So I have the checkbox off. What if you wanted to implement a deadline not just for one activity, but for the whole process? Then you can use an event subprocess and start the event subprocess with a timer and have it count down to the deadline time. Again, you can model that as an interrupting or a non-interrupting event based on what your requirements are.